Hi there. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is. As always, happy whatever day it is you're watching this. This is Left Side of the Aisle. I'm Larry Erickson. I'm your host. And for the next half hour or so, I'm going to be going on about some things that I think, at least I hope you will find interesting enough to pay attention to. If you have any reactions or questions or whatever, you can send them to me directly. My personal email is whoviating, WHOVIATING at AOL.com. Or you can go to my website, Lotus Surviving a Dark Time, and the URL will be over here somewhere a couple of times during the show. You can go there, you can get the email address from there, or you can leave a comment there if you'd rather do that. If you do send me email, please include something in the subject line that makes it clear this is not spam, that it's about the show. And two, please be a little patient about getting an answer, because I just really am lousy at answering email, but you will get an answer. All right, with that, let's get to it. This is something, I'm going to start with something I was going to talk about last week, but I actually ran out of time. So I decided I was going to do it right at the top this week so that it doesn't happen again. I don't lose it again. You may have heard about this case. A young college athlete named Corey Beatty brutally raped an unconscious woman. He was caught, he was tried, and he was convicted of 3 felony counts of sexual assault. He was sent to prison for 15 to 25 years. Except that is not Corey Beatty. That is Brock Turner. He also is or was a young college athlete. He also raped an unconscious woman. He was also caught, tried, and convicted of 3 felony counts of sexual assault. But unlike Corey Beatty, Brock Turner was given a sentence of 6 months, of which he will likely only serve 3. Because the judge in the case, one Aaron Persky, said he feared prison would have a severe impact on Turner. He could easily be home by the beginning of September. So that is Brock Turner, sentenced to 6 months in prison, or actually really 3 months in prison for felony sexual assault, because prison would be too hard on him. This is Corey Beatty, sentenced to 25 years in prison for 3 counts of felony sexual assault, the impact of prison apparently not being a consideration. 6 months for rape, 25 years for rape. 6 months, 25 years. Now, I'm not saying Corey Beatty should have gotten 6 months for rape. Don't be daft. I'm saying that I don't see how the impact of race and class on our criminal justice system could be made any plainer. I don't see how white privilege and even more class privilege could be made any clearer. Now, intervening weeks, since I was going to do this item, I've seen some others comment on this same disparity between these 2 cases, which actually occurred almost simultaneously. But in several of those cases, it was to minimize or even dismiss that stark difference with what amounted to that good old-fashioned excuse, it's complicated. Some of those attempts are almost farcical, such as one that argued that in the Corey Beatty case, there was physical evidence in the form of a videotape made by somebody else who was watching what was going on. That person, by the way, has also been charged. While physical evidence of that sort was absent in the Brock Turner case. Brock Turner was caught in the act by 2 witnesses who supplied internally consistent and mutually reinforcing accounts. What the hell difference does a lack of a videotape mean here? More seriously, yes. More serious objection, yes, the crimes did happen in different states with different legal definitions of what constitutes sexual assault and rape. And so, yes, the exact felonies of which the 2 were convicted were not identical, and so the legal punishment under those laws would not be identical. But considering that Turner could have been sent to prison for 14 years, and the prosecution wanted 6 years, those details do not begin to overcome the fact that Turner was given a little more than a slap on the wrist, if that, considering the severity of the crime, little more than a slap on the wrist, because the judge decided that prison would be hard on him. I don't see how we continue to tell ourselves that our criminal justice system has anything to do with justice. And so just as when some politician has to resign their office or some corporate honcho has to quit their job because of some scandal or another, and we're told yet again that they shouldn't be prosecuted because the humiliation is punishment enough, and just as the amazing Mr. O flatly refused to prosecute either the war criminals in the shrub cabinet or the corporate masters of the universe who very nearly wrecked the entire industrialized world economy because we have to look forward, not back, so again, we implicitly declare our conviction that prison is for the poor and for people of color and not for privileged white people. In her song, Sex Kills, Joni Mitchell sang, "Is justice just ice, governed by greed and lust, just the strong doing what they can and the weak suffering what they must?" Quite frankly, it sure looks that way. There is a footnote to this. There has been some pushback against Judge Persky. A juror in the case actually wrote and released a letter to the judge saying he was shocked and appalled by the sentence. And at least 10, this is the one actually person that I like, at least 10 prospective jurors in an unrelated case he was presiding over refused to serve on a jury in his courtroom. He was removed from another sexual abuse case. And a petition at change.org demanding his impeachment has over 1.25 million signers. All right, next up. We always like to have some good news here every week where we can. So here are a couple of sort of unrelated bits of good news. First is perhaps the most significant among them, which is that on June 14th, the FCC won a major victory for users of the internet. On that day, the Circuit Court of Appeals for Washington, D.C. upheld the agency's regulation on the important principle of net neutrality, the idea that data flowing over the net must be treated the same as all other data flowing over the net, and that ISPs and cable companies can't pick winners and losers, allowing data from favored sources, such as those who paid the cash for the privilege, to be able to move data faster, while data from less favored sources, those who hadn't ponied up the cash, were slowed or even throttled. More broadly, it affirms the FCC's authority to regulate ISPs as internet service providers, ISPs as common carriers or public utilities. It's in a similar way that telephone companies are regulated. It envisions the web as if it were one great big huge giant telephone network. And indeed, while the technology between telephones and the net is different, I mean, your landline telephone is, for example, not going to be using packet switching. The principle involved is the same. Data is data is data. A bit is a bit is a bit. In ruling that way, the court actually dealt a significant blow to the corporations such as Comcast, AT&T, and Verizon that wanted and still want to turn the internet, particularly the wireless internet, into one giant corporate playground. Perhaps equally significantly, this decision also offered up the prospect of the sort of consumer privacy and customer privacy protections that telecoms, that your phone company now has to observe, to expanding those to cover ISPs as well. Now, the reason actually I said that the well, let me put it this way. It's not really a surprise to say the court ruled as it did. It really isn't. Its decision was more favorable to internet users even than had been predicted, but it wasn't really a surprise because something over 2 years ago, this same court struck down an earlier attempt by the FCC to establish regulations for net neutrality in the wake of a suit by the same telecom giants over these same similar regulations. But the court dismissed it on a technicality. The FCC had classified the net as an information service, and the court found the agency didn't have the legal authority to regulate it the way it was trying to. However, two of the judges on the panel suggested that the FCC retained the underlying authority to regulate the web if it was classified as a common carrier. So the FCC did just that, which actually seems a more natural fit for the internet than information provider does. So the FCC did that, and they reissued the regulations in light of that, which led to another suit by these same corporations, but with this important and different result. The fight isn't over, of course. The telecoms are muttering about going to the Supreme Court or filing a new suit, looking to find different grounds to challenge the same regulations. But for now, the rules are enforced, and they actually have been for some months now. And somehow, despite the bleedings of the corporations, the net has collapsed into neither disrepair nor despair. All right, now for some really good news. On June 20th, the Supreme Court refused to hear an appeal of a Court of Appeals ruling that upheld gun control laws in New York and Connecticut, leaving those laws in place. The laws toughening the restrictions, these laws, have been passed in the wake of the Newtown massacre. Connecticut's has a ban on semi-automatic guns, which actually specifically names 180 weapons which cannot be sold, and also bans high-capacity magazines, defined as those that can carry more than 10 rounds. New York, in its own law created a registry of existing assault weapons, banned their future sale, and blocked the sale of high-capacity magazines. Now, this is actually the decision on net neutrality may be regarded as more significant only because this refusal by the Supreme Court to take the appeal was not unexpected. A lot of people predicted that would happen because since issuing its notorious Heller decision in 2008 and its follow-up McDonald ruling in 2010, the Supreme Court has been very reluctant to address the issue of guns. Not only New York and Connecticut, 5 more states, California, Massachusetts, Maryland, New Jersey, and Hawaii, now also have bans on assault weapons and have other controls in place. And a lot of local cities and towns also have controls in place. None of the legal challenges to any of these laws have been successful in lower courts. And no appeal of those rulings that has gone to the Supreme Court has been accepted by the court for a hearing. Which means, yes, banning the possession and sale of the mass murderer's favorite weapon is possible. And how's that for good news? Finally, one last bit before we go to the break of what personally I think is good news. In 2012, the state of Colorado legalized marijuana for personal recreational use. According to a new survey from the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, in the first 2 years of legalization, the rate of marijuana use among Colorado teenagers not only didn't go up, it actually declined slightly, which is in line with a trend of teenage pot use declining across the country. Now, I said before on more than one occasion that while I do favor the legalization of marijuana for personal use, and I have for quite some time, this is not an issue that is high on my personal list of priorities. Nonetheless, it's still good to see another scare tactic. You know, the tech of, what about the children? It's good to see another scare tactic, if you will, go up in smoke. And the thing is, even if you are totally anti-drug, you still should regard this as good news. Because this means that as the move for legalization continues to gain ground, in fact, the majority of Americans, according to polls, now support legalization of marijuana, you can at least feel the relief that such legalization will not lead to more young people getting stoned. And so it will allow you to focus more on determining what will deter drug use rather than having to commit yourself to the continuing failure of the war on drugs. And let's take a break. And we're back. Next up, some personal indulgences here. I have a couple of things that I regard as, I'll call them interesting news. The first one is something you may not think is good news, but I do, or at least I think of it as encouraging news. It's the news that, according to more than one survey, young Americans are souring on capitalism, or at least capitalism as it is now being practiced in the United States. Writing about this in one of these surveys at Foreign Policy magazine, Sarah Kendzior suggests we shouldn't be surprised by the results. Suppose she says, you're 20 years old, okay? For as long as you can remember, since you were 5 or 6, the United States has been at war. When you were 12, the world economy collapsed, and it still hasn't really recovered. Real wages continue to decline, while the costs of things like health care, child care, and tuition continue to rise and rise again. Full-time jobs turn into contract positions as benefits are slashed. Middle-class jobs are replaced by low-paying service work. And a college degree, once considered the great equalizer, turns out a path to drowning in student debt while working for minimum wage or slaving at an unpaid internship. Is it any wonder, she asks, why over half of 18 to 29-year-olds in America say they don't support capitalism? To which my answer is no, it's not surprising, and it's a good thing. Now, this is not being accompanied by an equally strong surge and embrace of socialism. 33% in that same survey she was talking about say they support socialism, while 42% say they support capitalism. And more importantly, the understanding which people put on the terms, people who were surveyed were put on the terms capitalism and socialism was not explored. So there's an awful lot of wiggle room in interpreting these results. But still, as a democratic socialist who actually thinks that Bernie Sanders' concept of the socialist part is a bit limited, I can still feel encouraged by the growing and grudging awareness that no, capitalism ultimately cannot meet human needs, even as I can hate the desperation and discouragement that brought that knowledge. A few months ago, Hillary Clinton, in sort of dismissing Sanders' version of democratic socialism, still did describe capitalism as a system that sometimes has to be rescued from its own excesses. Certainly, FDR's New Deal was a perfect example of that. And frankly, the CEOs and politicos of present-day United States would be wise to get behind, if you will, a new Deal if they want to preserve their vision of capitalism. But I can still remember thinking when I heard her say that, why would you want to embrace an economic system that even its proponents admit has to be repeatedly rescued from its own failings? All right, the other interesting bit of news I've got here is something we are going to file under GMTA, which, if you've been living under a rock so long that you're still a little confused by this television gizmo thing, stands for Great Minds Think Alike. I have on more than one occasion talked about how the primary use of the wretched failure known as the drug war has been to demonize the poor as druggies for the purpose of requiring poor people to get drug tested in order to get benefits such as TANF, which is Temporary Aid to Needy Families, which we used to call welfare, or SNAP, which is Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program. People still call it food stamps. The purpose of having people tested for this under the assumption poor people are drug users, and so you could actually throw people off the program. And they're doing that despite the experience where various states have done this, the experience of such programs showing that poor people are actually less likely to be using drugs than the general population is. I argued that the persistence of such programs in the face of their repeated failures is actually based on our overall social contempt for the poor. Last October, I said, and this is an edited version, I'm quoting myself, "We don't demand that those applying for subsidized student loans prove they're drug-free before they get aid. We don't demand that a middle-class family taking advantage of the Earned Income Tax Credit get tested first. We don't demand that the rich pee in a cup before they can take tax deductions on the mortgages on their McMansions. We don't demand that farmers looking for price supports prove their purity before they can get aid. When corporations through their lobbyists get special exemptions for themselves written into the tax code, we don't demand that those corporate executives prove that they're clean so we can be sure that those benefits that we're giving them aren't being used to feed somebody's drug habit. No public financial benefit of any kind in this country, no grant, no tax deduction, no low-interest loan, no subsidy, none of it comes with a requirement that you pee in a cup unless the beneficiaries are poor. Well, another voice has joined that chorus. Milwaukee Congresswoman Gwen Moore saying she is sick and tired of being sick and tired of the criminalization of poverty, has introduced what she calls the Top 1% Accountability Act. It would require taxpayers submitting itemized deductions of at least $150,000 to either submit a clear drug test to the IRS or use the standard deduction in filing their tax returns. Now, to put that in perspective, according to figures that the IRS gathered back in 2011, people with deductions of $150,000 or more, this really would apply to people with adjusted gross incomes of at least $1 million. And the standard deduction is $6,300 for an individual or for a married person filing separately. In other words, the deal here is pee in a cup and be clean, or lose $143,700 in tax deductions. Moore said she was inspired to file her bill when on June 7th, Representative Paul Ranton made a speech to showcase what he claims is an anti-poverty initiative, but which actually was based on the old narrative that poor people are drug abusers and that is the root of the problem. That, she said, was the last straw. We're not going to get rid of the federal deficit by cutting poor people off SNAP, she said. I'm quoting her, obviously. But if we're going to drug test people to reduce the deficit, let's start at the other end of the income spectrum, which is, after all, where the money is. Moore noted that the federal government spends $81 billion a year on everything, and she emphasized everything that could be considered a poverty program. But taxing capital gains at a lower rate than ordinary income, a tax benefit of far more value to the rich than to anyone else, that benefit alone reduces federal tax income by $93 billion a year. Now, the bill, of course, stands absolutely no chance in the Gopper-controlled House. And bluntly, I doubt many Dems would stand with her either, because too many of the rich donors, hell, too many rich Democratic members of the House could be affected by this. Even so, it's good to have someone raise their voice with their aim at the right target. Now, admittedly, her target was not as wide as mine was in terms of who should have to pee in that proverbial cup. But on the other hand, in May of 2015, 5 months before the rant that my own rant that I just quoted a minute or two ago, she wrote, and I'm quoting, "Attaching special demands to government aid exclusively targets our country's most vulnerable individuals and families." Which I suppose in a way means she didn't join my chorus, I joined hers. But in either event, yep, this is GMTA. All right, something else, a very different topic. I've been thinking the past couple of weeks, it's something we have fallen down on around here, is coverage of events outside the United States. We used to talk at least some about international events, but lately we've become extremely U.S.-centric. So we're going to try to remedy that, try to pay a little more attention to international affairs, to the world beyond our borders. But oddly enough, the first thing I intended to talk about on this, I'm not going to, not really, because it's right now it's more something I want you to be aware of. There's a good reason for that, though. The thing that I want you to be aware of is something called Brexit, which is short for British exit. It's a referendum in Great Britain asking if that nation should withdraw from the European Union. And the reason I'm not going to talk about it much is that the vote on the referendum is coming the day after I'm doing this show, which means it very likely will have already happened by the time you see this show. So I'm not going to talk much about that vote. I will note very quickly that John Oliver had a good piece on it on his HBO show, what's called Last Week Tonight, and that is available on YouTube if you want to see it. Anyway, the point is this referendum is a significant issue in Great Britain. It has closely divided both the people of the UK and the political leadership of the political parties in ways that don't fall along party lines. There are Tories both for getting out of the EU and for staying in. There are Labourites divided the same ways. There are differences of opinion among the Liberal Democrats. Perhaps the only party that seems to be united is the far right-wing UK Independence Party, which pretty much hates anything foreign. And of course, then there are those who say the whole thing is a sham, which actually ultimately won't make any real difference one way or the other. And in fact, they may well be right. What's significant for the moment, and why I bring this up at all, is that the campaign to leave the EU, in the words of James Oliphant and Emily Stevenson writing at Reuters, it's that it has a lot of what they call Trumpism minus Trump about it. Quoting them, the nationalism, the romanticized nostalgia for an earlier time, the mistrust of political and financial elites, and the fears that migrants are bringing crime and stealing jobs. In short, it's driven by nativist fears more than by any significant economic or practical reasons. Because of that, this same referendum can also serve as a sign as just how strong those sentiments which can easily turn or be turned to bigotry and xenophobia, how strong those sentiments are in present-day Great Britain. And because of the similarities with the passions that drive the acolytes of the rump here, it could serve as a dew line, a distant early warning line of what could be developing here. Which is why I want you to make sure you are aware of the results of this referendum, and I will try, and I emphasize the word try, to talk a little more next week about the issues involved and about the fallout from whatever the result was. But before we step off the international stage, there's one other bit of news I want to point out. According to a report issued on June 20th by the United Nations High Commissioner on Refugees, as of December 15th, there were 65.3 million refugees, asylum seekers, and internally displaced people in the world. That is the highest number ever recorded, surpassing even the days following World War II. What this figure means, is that a touch under 1% of the entire population of the world consists of people who have been driven from their homes. The war in Syria alone has produced 5 million people fleeing their homes. And it's getting worse right now as refugees from Fallujah threaten to overwhelm the UN resources available to assist them, to the point where this threatens to become a humanitarian catastrophe. Now here's something that we should know as Americans. For the second year in a row, Turkey was the nation in the world that hosted the largest number of refugees, some 2.5 million externally displaced people. It was followed by Pakistan hosting 1.6 million, Lebanon 1.1 million, Iran 979,000, and Ethiopia 736,000. And meanwhile, the United States will very likely not even reach its own self-imposed goal of accepting 85,000 refugees this year. Finally, for today, there's something you may notice that I have not talked about, and you may have been a little surprised about my silence on the issue. What I'm referring to here is the so predictable and so despicable failure of the Senate to pass or even come to a final vote on any of 4 bills that at least claim to put some sort of restrictions on the ability of people to get whatever murderous firepower they want. I find it, right now, I just cannot talk about this. I can't. What I will just say is that Hillary Clinton, praise where it's due, she does support a ban on assault weapons. Praise where it's due. She can find her response to a single word: enough. I will confine my response for now to a different single word: cowards. By the way, just as I was preparing the show, literally an hour before I was ready to do this, came word that about 40 members of the House of Representatives are staging a sit-in on the floor of the House to try to push a vote on gun control there. And I really, really just say, right on, my brothers and sisters. That's it for this week. We will get back next week. We've got obviously more stuff to talk about. But for now, for the moment, we will just tell you, as we always do, you have the best week you possibly can. And for now, peace.